even when I was really young, I remember like putting myself on a timeline, being like, all right, by 23, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to get my MBA, and then I'm going to get this type of job, and then I'm going to like get, engaged by this age, and then I'm going to have my first kid, and then I'm going to, do work for 2 years. Like it was like so planned out. Ultimately, like none of that played out in the way that I wanted it to. The only reason that I was able to achieve what I have been able to achieve is by being open to the opportunities that were coming to me at the time.
Welcome to Very Beginning, a podcast where we shift the narrative from happy ending to exciting beginning. My name is Anastasia, and through conversations with inspiring entrepreneurs, athletes, influencers, and all-around trailblazers, I'm looking to explore how we can get more comfortable with change and find the courage to unlock that scary first chapter to something we've been wanting to do for far too long. So, without further ado, and so it begins. Anisha, let's take it from the very beginning. Hello and welcome.
Hi, so lovely to be here. It's been a long time planning.
It has. I'm so glad for your time. And it's so nice to see you again. I think we haven't seen each other in a couple of years, so it's always so nice to reconnect.
I know.
But yeah, on this podcast, I really like to start to introduce someone thinking of the impact they had. And in your case, as I was kind of thinking about it, it's really interesting because I feel like your personal impact and what you do and what you picked as your career are really completely intertwined, because you made it your personal mission to make this, well, you could say, world more sustainable. So I'm super excited to be talking to you today. I'd really love to dive into the company you founded and also into your huge success of being listed on the Forbes 30 under 30 list last year. So again, congrats on that amazing achievement.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so Bluebird is my company that I founded about 2 years ago now, sort of peak COVID company. I co-founded it alongside two other co-founders, and I'm kind of the sustainability consumer brands, person on the team who really led that side of things up. So, kind of leading up to the company, I had, my whole career has been in consumer products. I had worked at Unilever as, a chemical engineer and, developed products there, and also kind of took new products to market and in building them into new factories and, figuring out how to scale them up. And also kind of worked in a lot of global supply chains, and found over and over again that, while large brands like Unilever have these capabilities to actually think about the sustainability and the global impact of their products, I was always left thinking, like, what about the smaller brands? Like, I could always see us at Unilever kind of looking at these small brands and being like, well, they're doing stuff that's really cool, but we were taking 3 or 5 or 7 years to launch a product because there's so much, red tape that comes along with being, a large company and also navigating such a ginormous supply chain. So I then moved on to working with smaller brands. And also, I think Stacy or Anastasia, where I met you, was actually being able to get my degree in sustainability management at Columbia, and knowing that I had this passion for sustainability, and also started working with small brands at the same time. And what I was finding was there were all of these founders that were like, Anisha, we want to integrate sustainability into our products, but we think we're too small. Like, it's too early. We can't do it. Only the big guys can do it. And I was like, no, that's not true. It's actually so much easier as a small brand to start thinking about these things earlier, given if you have the, access to resources and tools. But at the time, it was really, really difficult to do. So I kind of made it my personal mission to make that possible. So we're now about 2 years in. We have a bunch of brands on the platform and are really focusing on kind of beauty and wellness brands to start. It's an area where obviously I've had a background. My co-founder is previously from Glossier as well. And so we, have kind of a foothold in this space, and, know it's an area that there's a lot of opportunity. So yeah, we really give brands kind of like the tools to understand the sustainability and also reduce their impact of their products over time and tell their story in a really transparent way.
And it's interesting because you mentioned you had this background in at Unilever, right? So you came from a big corporation, and I work myself in like the CPG industry, so I know what you mean by it takes forever to launch a product. It really does. But I wonder still, like even having this frustration, I think so many people still are too afraid to take that plunge just because, right, like a big corporation offers you security, right? And there's so many benefits. And then when you go out and you found your company, you're kind of like, you're swimming in the ocean. So what was your thought process? Were you at all scared when you then decided, okay, it's time for you to really venture out on your own? Or were you just so driven by your mission and passion for sustainability?
Oh, hell yeah, I was scared. Yeah, what I knew though was that like I had a background that was applicable. A lot of people refer to Unilever as like Unilever University. Like people kind of treat it as like another, kind of stepping stone in their educational career almost because you learn kind of how business works. And I knew that like those skills were going to be valuable and, kind of my academic background as well. But I think there's still like this imposter syndrome of it all, even just getting involved in smaller companies, you're like one of maybe one or two people on the team, or one of, which was my first role working with startups. It was like me and the founder. And I was kind of like, all right, well, we're making decisions over lunch, of which way to steer the company. And it was like really exciting, but also super scary. And then, as I just continued being in that place with my career with all of these smaller brands, it was like, okay, I have a voice. I need to be careful with my voice sometimes, or just like learn to trust myself and what I'm saying and like kind of lean on my background and what I've learned. So it's really been, over the past few years, like very much coming into my own confidence in a way, and actually trusting myself and being like, oh, like what I have to say is actually valuable, but it took a while to get here.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's like probably like a lifelong learning,
Oh, I mean,
right? That like
100%.
and probably especially unfortunately as women, we feel like, oh, I don't know if I should speak up, right? Does my voice really matter? So for me, it was also a really steep learning curve, especially in a big corporation, to be like, okay, I must have something to say, right? To raise your hand.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that it must have been scary.
Yeah, I mean, starting my own company, I had actually kind of reached out to a bunch of people as I was kind of making decisions. I had a couple other like offers on the table from other companies. There was like a company that was trying to make a role for me as well, but I was like, well, like I kind of have this itch to do something a little more entrepreneurial, and reached out to a couple of my mentors and had gotten recommended a couple of books, one of which was Designing Your Life, which I think a lot of people read and kind of take with a grain of salt. Also, like there's, you kind of take what you put in. You got what you put in into that book. But the one that was really impactful for me, as you bring up, kind of like the role of being a woman and kind of the decisions that we make and kind of things that we decide to lean into, is this book called Playing Big by Tara Mohr. It starts off and you think it's going to be very similar to like a Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, but it's actually like much deeper and kind of goes into like where we may have gotten some of these notions around like women and what we can and can't do. And there's this whole idea around like the types of fear that we have, where there's like this one type of fear. It kind of talks about in Judaism, like there's two different versions of fear. And one of them is really much more about kind of like the fear of, like actual like pain and actual like, a threat on the horizon. But then there's this other type of fear that's really more about taking up more space than you're used to, and being able to kind of feel like you're leaning into something that's bigger than yourself. And I think being able to start to recognize those two different types of fear and be like, is this an opportunity for me to actually lean into, you know, something that I'm scared of doing because I think that, I can't do it yet. Like the like good student, like I need to study more before I'll be ready for that. Versus, being able to actually say like, all right, I know I want to do that. And like that fact alone, based on like the background that I have and like my ability to know that I can figure it out, is enough for me to do that thing. And that's what really like enabled me to get the like kick in the ass to start my company.
But that is so interesting. And I think it's to what you said, like to defining even what kind of fear are you feeling, right? Because some fears might be just something we need to get over, right? In terms of like, well, I'm afraid, imposter syndrome, or all these kind of reasons that we can try to get over. But I think some fears, as you said, always also have really a place and a reason to be there, right? Like maybe you just haven't had the experience. And for some people, I think it probably makes sense, right, to first go in the corporate space and get some experience. Is that what would you say, is that the advice that you also give to people who ask you like, hey, I have this entrepreneurial drive and I want to do this, but I'm just so unexperienced? Would you always recommend to first really go in the corporate space?
I think it does help. It did help me a lot in kind of understanding, even just like before Unilever, like I had started interning for Unilever like my sophomore year of college. Like that was my first like real role outside of, kind of like research and things like that. Um, so that's really what taught me like how a business even works. Like what are the things that are even involved? Like the things you don't learn in class if you're not in like a business program in your undergrad, right? So what are the ways that a company functions? What are the different roles that are even needed to be played? Like that kind of structure. And I think that that's really helpful in understanding how to, apply those lessons to smaller companies and like figure out what to focus on as an entrepreneur as well. Because like what I've figured out is that there's so much happening all the time and you really need to figure out how to prioritize. And if you try to just like do everything all at once, you're like either going to never stop working or you're going to like go in a direction that's not actually driving your business forward. And I think having that like idea of like what actually makes like a reasonable business and like how it can actually move forward is helpful. So like in terms of like, should you go into corporate first? Like, I don't know if corporate is always the only way to do that, but I do think having some sort of like more structured role initially does help to kind of like set that like framework in your mind, at least for me. And then, being able to then take that forward and figure out like, okay, how do I take what I've learned and apply it in a more scrappy way?
No, for sure. And I think some people also really rely on then to not do it by themselves, but to see like, hey, can we get other thoughts in or other voices in, or maybe close that knowledge gap that I myself might have. So you mentioned you started the company with a co-founder. Was it someone you already knew, or did you actually go out searching for someone to start this company with you, having had the idea?
Yeah, so it's actually like very funny, and like if you ask him, he'll tell the story in like a slightly different way as well. But
We'll believe
for
your
me,
story.
yeah, and it's funny when we tell it together. We have like a version that we tell, in investor pitches, but there's like the version that we tell people over beers. Like it's very different. But so I had been thinking about this like idea of like how do I build the playbook for how brands can build their supply chains in a sustainable way and like design products in a sustainable way. And I came into like my consulting role where I was working with a bunch of different brands, like a couple of years even before Bluebird was even like a thought in my mind. And just didn't end up being able to execute on it despite like having all of these questions just in kind of like running my day to day. So it was like kind of this like latent seed in my mind of something that I wanted to do, but also never thought that I would like leave and do it on my own. I thought that it would be something that I could do within the organization that I was already in. And it just ended up being that it didn't happen for me that way. And, there were other priorities that we had in the business at the time and, different offering that we were providing. And Jamie, my co-founder, had reached out through one of my, best friends that I'd gone to Columbia with, and she had kind of been like, "Oh, Jamie is working on a company that, is kind of in the space, like consumer brands and consumer products, and trying to evaluate like the sustainability of them. Seems like it might be something that's kind of up your alley. He's looking for like a subject matter expert to ask a couple of questions about as he like goes forward in building his business." And I was still like very much working at the company that I was at the time, and um, really like hadn't even thought, about, any other direction. And I just remember like a spark happening during that conversation of like, oh, like I just feel like this is something that's really exciting. And I think that it was like a really great time for us to like be able to work together, even in that quick like 30-minute chat that we had, and just talk about like, oh, like, well, maybe at the time he was very much focusing on like the consumer side of things. And then we, kind of started working more on like the brand side of things together, because that had been my experience. Like, I think you can actually have more influence if you go to the brand instead of the consumer. And, so he had come to me, and then a couple of months later, like as I had decided to kind of transition out of the company that I was in, I was kind of thinking and entertaining some of these other offers, and I was like, well, what has really like lit my fire in the past like 6 months or so? And I just remember that conversation, and so I texted him, and he refers to it now as sliding into his DMs, but it was literally a text message. And he was like, I was like, are you still working on this thing? And he was like, yeah. He was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm fun employed now. And he was like, okay, do you want to chat? And I was like, sure, let's chat this afternoon. And it kind of turned from like a 30-minute scheduled chat into like a 3.5 hour conversation. And halfway through, we were like, are we vetting each other to be co-founders? And then we ended up going into this like really long, like condensed process, but like some of like the deepest questions that you might ever ask someone. It's called like the co-founder dating questionnaire. And you ask people about like, what are your fears? Like, how does like depression and anxiety manifest in you? And how can I recognize that and support you at that time? Like, this was on like day 3 of knowing this person that we were going into this level of detail. How do you think about finances and like what's important to you in terms of like what you might be able to achieve financially from this business? And like, how do you think about compensation? Like things like that are like really big questions. And so it just requires a lot of trust, I think. And even if it's a person that you don't know before.
Listening to you, it really sounds like dating someone, right? Like meeting someone and like having a spark and then seeing, right? Like if you're on the same wavelength. So I think that is super interesting, because oftentimes I feel like people are just, oh, I just need this person just to close that skill that I don't have, and then kind of don't even look so much at that personal level because they're so just hyper focused on what their business needs. But I think that's super inspiring that you guys focused on, right, like that interpersonal level. And of course you are aligned on your ideas,
Yeah.
and I'm sure on your values, but that it was really like you took the time to make sure like that works, right? Like on the personal level, you guys work together. So I think that is a really great takeaway for people considering a co-founder.
Yeah, I will also say, like, I know many like solo entrepreneurs who have a really hard time. Like, it's really hard. You can't really rely on, like, you can rely on your employees, but it's hard to share that kind of like emotional burden of running the company with your employees in the same way, given that you often want to, be a leader and actually like project, like I know what I'm doing and things are going well, when you don't always know what you're doing. And things may be going well, but you also don't want to get anybody's hopes up, or things are maybe a little more stagnant that you want to be in certain weeks or certain months. And so it's really like you kind of need that like partner. And I'm lucky to have two. Like, we actually had Jamie and me. Like, we had started it out, and we brought in DJ, who's our third co-founder, and really came in on the software technical side. And so we have this like great like team of 3 actually that tackles the company in different ways.
So 3 years ago, you mentioned you were unemployed, right, when you guys met. And then fast forward to last year, you are on the list of Forbes 30 under 30. I mean, I think that is, first of all, like huge congratulations again. I think that is such an amazing and such well-deserved achievement. But what an inspiring career journey, right? For someone out there, especially in today's environment, right? And day and age where so many people, so many qualified, intelligent people are losing their jobs, right? Especially in the tech space right now. But things can change, right? So I would love if you could just tell me, how was that for you? What did it really mean for you to be recognized on this list?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if this is going to come off the right way, but I don't know. I don't think about it that much. Like, really ultimately like the reason that we decided to kind of go for it, and just to like peel back the curtain a little bit. It's like, it's not as if like there's absolutely nothing that's involved at all. Like, somebody needs to nominate you, and there does a lot of the time like people nominate themselves, or like their companies nominate them, like things like that. And so it ended up being that like my co-founder nominated me because like I was still below the age. And really like the reason that we went for it is less because like I wanted personal recognition, but more because like it does open doors for the business. And sometimes people are more likely to take a meeting with you if they know that you're Forbes 30 under 30, which is like to me like a little bit silly. Like I think like I find it difficult to, view an accolade like that and actually see it as like a personal reflection. But I think that's just like me and my like continued journey and like confidence and all of these things. But and being like, oh, it's about me, it's not about the business, so like decoupling like the fact that it's my name on the list, not necessarily the company's name on the list, is something that I'm still reconciling. But I think the whole process was basically just like being able to, talk about, once you're like nominated and you get shortlisted, there's then this process of like, you have to fill in like some information so they can get to know you a little bit better. And for that, like, ultimately, like what I wanted to reflect on was like my excitement around being able to build the team that I have, and actually like attract the right people to be able to build this thing with me. And I think that's why it's like been so like exciting for me to like be able to be on that, is, just being able to be a representation of like having our company's name out there. It's less like about me.
No, for sure. I mean, the way I've gotten to know you over our studies, I wouldn't have expected anything else. But I think it's such an interesting idea and thought that you shared, that it is a door opener, right? And I think in the same way, having studied the both of us at Columbia, I think that is
Yeah.
similar, right? Like could have we have gotten the same education or the same kind of knowledge somewhere else? Maybe, right? Like we don't know. We haven't tried our respective programs at every other university in this world, but having the name Columbia University on your CV does definitely also open doors. So I think that is a really interesting thought to really, just really stop for a moment and think like, am I doing this because I truly am passionate about something? And I think so many people are like you. I think also with the nomination for Forbes Under 30 or studying at Columbia and this specific program for sustainability, it sounds like you did it out of a passion. But I think so many people are really guided by kind of having this accolade, right? Like standing out and just almost giving themselves some level of recognition that they just need, like this validation, right? That they achieved something. And I think that's where it becomes a bit dangerous, right? Because I don't think an external degree, award, accolade, anything can really give you that. So that's why, like, I mean, the Forbes 30 and 30, I think it's a great award, right? It recognizes amazing founders, amazing people like yourself doing really great work. But I think it can also be really dangerous because it creates so much pressure. And just before our call, I did some Googling, and there's so many videos even on YouTube where people are like, how do I make it on this list? And people in the comments are like, oh my God, I only have 1 year and I feel so much pressure. I really need to be on this list. So it just creates all this unnecessary pressure, right? Because if you have these passions in life, like go for it. No list should tell you if you're good at it or bad. So I don't know if you had similar thoughts, but I just always kind of, thought about these awards with like a grain of salt.
Oh, 100%. I mean, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about like how I've sort of like my entire life, like lived my life on this like ladder, like I'm walking up a staircase and like everything is like a step to the next thing. Like I'm climbing and climbing. And I think that's how I'd lived my life for a long time, was like, this is a means to the next end. This is a means to the next end. And I think, I had at one point, like, even when I was really young, I remember like putting myself on a timeline, being like, all right, by 23, I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to get my MBA. And then I'm going to get this type of job. And then I'm going to like get, engaged by this age. And then I'm going to have my first kid. And then I'm going to, do work for 2 years. Like it was like so planned out. And like, ultimately, like none of that played out in the way that I wanted it to. The only reason that I was able to achieve what I have been able to achieve is by being open to the opportunities that were coming to me at the time. Like it wasn't by being super stringent in I'm sticking to this like very intense plan and like sticking to a very well-defined timeline. It was like, what am I feeling? Like staying super in tune with like how I'm feeling about myself and what I need in my own personal and like professional growth, and like what I am feeling in terms of like excitement and passion on a day-to-day basis. Because for me, like if I'm not feeling that, then like I start to have a lot of doubts around my own self-worth. And that's where like I struggle, and I think also like you can look at it, it's really funny and like silly, but I just watched this like TikTok about like Leslie Knope from Parks and Recreation yesterday. I don't know if you've seen that show, but
Yeah.
it was talking about how, when the show starts, I think she's 32 or 33, and like she, is still working at, like the Parks and Recreation department. She like, finally gets a role, that she's looking for, like as like a councilwoman when she's like in her upper 30s. Like she finally meets her partner, like has her first kid, like in her later 30s, like early 40s. Like she's like expected to like get a larger role, like in her, later into her 40s, 50s. It's like, I don't think that this like narrative around like if it needs to be done before you're 30 for it to mean anything is really valid, because like an overshare, but like I'm not where I want to be in my personal life outside of work. Like I've channeled everything I've had into my career, and I think possibly living a more balanced life and working on a longer timeline may have meant that like I could be in a different place with my personal life than I am now, and so I don't know that being in like a timeline to rush to get something in by 30 just because of it. I think you're right, it can be a slippery slope and can really put you in that like one track place that could lead you, like I think I've done a lot to not be in that place, but like leads you to be like, this is all my eggs in this one basket, versus kind of like spreading it across different areas of your life too.
For sure. But I think finally that society is starting to
Yeah.
being like, hey, age does not matter. Like,
Yeah.
I think, for instance, even at the Oscars, right? Like Michelle Yeoh, who won the
Yes.
best actress, like I think she was
Love
60.
that.
Yeah, and I think even in her speech said like, well, you see, you can do it at 60. And I think she wasn't even getting any accolades until her 40s or 50s. And there were so many other actresses and actors that are getting recognized at an older age, which I think is really a little bit representative of what's happening in society, because Hollywood is always this little bubble, but it used to be all about like only if you're young and attractive you can be
Yeah.
successful, and now it kind of starts being more like actually about the skills. Like, hey, it took a while, but I think that's really great, and it's a really good reminder for people that your age does not matter, even if you like want to change your career or want to pivot or do something else, move to a different country. Like, it's never too late, really,
Yeah.
I think, to start something. And I found myself putting the same pressure on me. Like, I just turned 30 a couple of months ago, and honestly, like, I wasn't scared or sad, and I was actually excited because so many people have told me, actually, your 30s
Yeah.
are so
30's gonna
great.
be
And
20.
yeah. And I also think like I know myself so much better than I did in my 20s. Like,
Yeah.
even though I have not figured any, like, I would never say like I figured life out, like not at
Oh my
all,
gosh.
not
Yeah.
even
No.
close to it. But you just know better who you are and what you want. And when people ask you, and some people actually did say like, oh, you're turning 30, are you a bit scared, or what are your thoughts? And I was like, wow, are we still having these
Yeah.
discussions,
Right.
really? And also, I wonder, do men still get these questions? Because I think there was also a lot of sexism around
Yeah.
this.
I
So,
don't think they
yeah,
do.
no.
No.
Just one of these, again, that we women have the pleasure of getting.
Yeah. I know.
And just one more question on the Forbes 30 under 30 thematic. How was it for you then after achieving it? And you mentioned it was great for your company, but did it feel in any way like, okay, what's next? Because you did say you oftentimes in life you felt like, I'm climbing a ladder, it needs to be higher and higher and higher. So you've kind of achieved that pinnacle of like professional success in your 20s, right? Like in your early career. So did it ever feel like, oh my God, what do I do next? How do I live up to that? Or were you more kind of in tune by that time and by that age to say like, now I'm just doing what feels right and not focusing so much on that climbing part?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I've come to, and even in the past like 6 or 8 months, is kind of like coming around to this idea that, while I've been on this like ladder, on this staircase my whole life, like I was actually telling someone this recently. It's kind of like I've now gotten to the place in my career that like I'm still at an early stage startup. Like it could be a success, it could not. Like there's still like all of that like uncertainty in that. But I also know that like where I am now and kind of what I've been able to achieve, like I hope to have a lot more choice in what I do next. And it's like much more hopefully going to be on my terms as well. Like I'll be able to like kind of figure out like what do I actually want. And I think the thoughts that have been coming through my mind more and more is like now that I've been able to kind of like check that box of like, all right, I've achieved what I wanted to as like an entrepreneur and kind of done that piece. It's like, how do I now like take all the learnings of doing all of this and kind of like figure out how to like have more balance in my life and like figure out how to focus on my friendships and focus on like travel and like the things that really get me excited and kind of fill my cup outside of work, and how do I focus on like building a partnership and building an actual life and a family. Like those are all things that I want as well. And so now it's like, okay, like great, like I've kind of checked a box and I know that career is going to continue to be like a huge part of my life, but how do I now like recraft my life so I'm not like on this ladder anymore and that it's a much more like balanced picture. So for me it's like no longer like okay, what's the next like accolade I can get. It's like, how do I, like to your point about like knowing yourself better in your 30s, I think once I got to like 30 I was like, okay, great, now I like have more choices with like what I want to do and how I want to spend my time. And um so I'm very much like in the throes of that right now. It's just like, how do I reconcile like what I want out of life and what kind of career allows me to do that. And how can I do that with what I've already like committed to in my life, and how can I adjust it given that I am an entrepreneur that has the choice in her own business to do that.
I'm curious, do you believe in the term work-life balance? Because I've read and heard so many different thoughts on this, and some people just say like it's a nice, kind of utopian saying that it even exists. I've heard some really interesting theories that are a bit more like, well, it's not a balance, it's more like a work-life integration, which I
Yeah.
also found an interesting concept. How is it for you? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I do not think that work life balance, like in its like name, like the concept is really like a thing. Like I think for many of us, and we've seen this even like through the pandemic, and like now, like many of us, like work was like our way to touch the world for a lot of us when like we were all at home and like kind of like working at our, working from home. Like we were interacting with people through our computers, and like that was kind of like for me one of the main ways to connect with people, and like even with my friends, like it was all through the computer, like which is all like kind of in this like weird work context, on Zoom and things like that. And so for me I think it is more on like that kind of like integration side, and kind of feeling like how do you make work a part of life to like the degree that makes sense. And I think it is like a fluid thing. Like for me, like it has been like a large percentage of my life. Like someone was telling me recently about this kind of like checkerboard concept, where like you have kind of all the different like pieces of your life, like your friends, your like pets, maybe your like, time outside, your hobbies, like, the types of food you eat and like cooking, like your relationships, your family, like all of those pieces. But like how big are those blocks on that board? And for me it's like I've had like a full like blackboard with like a couple of spots for some of my hobbies and my family, but like the rest of it has all been my company. And now I'm trying to see like, okay, how can I get more like alternating squares in my life?
And I think while we can and should, and probably everyone should probably try to be as present as they can, but it's impossible to be everything for everyone at once,
Yeah.
right? It just, I think it's like again, probably a women thing that we always put this pressure on ourselves. Like we have to be amazing in everything that we do. And what you were just saying reminded me of this Sex and the City episode. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
where, uh, where Carrie was like, why is it that when you look at kind of the having an apartment in New York, having a boyfriend, and like having a job that you love, like if you have two of them and they're perfect, it still feels incomplete, even
Yeah.
though those two things might be amazing, right? I mean, and they can translate to just having a house or a home or just a place to live, right? And a relationship. But maybe your career isn't as good. But it does sometimes translate into, oh my
Yeah.
God, my life sucks, right? Why is
Yeah.
that?
I know. It's my relationship with gratitude in my life has been on a continuum. I will say that. I think, being able to be thankful for what I do have and, be grateful for that. But I think what I've also learned through this journey too is that, like, if you're not like staying on top of how you're feeling and, kind of doing that self-reflection, it's easy to like lose track of like where you were and where you are now. And I think I enjoy having conversations like this. And, I often enjoy like mentoring like students as well, because it allows me to like retell my story for people and then I can kind of process it. Because when you're working so much and you're like living your life or busy with like the rat race of it all, you don't often like stop and are like, oh, this is where I was a year ago. And the choices that I've made have led me to where I am today. And like kind of doing that side by side comparison of like, what was I doing a year ago, and how did it like lead to where I am now? And um, I don't know. I think it's just important. Like if some of this is like for advice for entrepreneurs as well, it's kind of like try to do like I didn't do this and I wanted to like try to do like a short like daily journal or like a little like note to yourself of like how am I feeling today? Like what's big going on? Like because you're gonna want to look back and see that stuff. Because I'm kind of like, oh, like I wish I had that now.
Yeah, I love that advice because also like it a little bit contradicts like this hustle culture. And now I moved back to Europe, but I found that especially in the US, it's always like run, run, run and hustle, 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 and like don't even take a minute to reflect. And I mean, maybe it's the same in other countries, but I just found the US to be like
Yeah,
very much
especially.
focused on that. Also with like minimal vacation days and other things. But yeah, I think that's amazing advice to, especially as an entrepreneur and in a startup, but things are probably moving at a crazy rapid pace to
Lightning,
just
yeah.
take a moment, right? Take a breath. And also to just say, like, hey, I'm proud of myself. Or like
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, tomorrow I'll fail, but today I was great and I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to come to our final segment that is called the final three. So, just meant to be three quick questions, little bit about what we already talked about, but just really meant to be the quick takeaways for listeners. So, the first question is, what helped you go from idea of wanting to found your company to actually doing it?
I think it's just coming around to the idea that while it feels like you need everything figured out, having knowing yourself and knowing like the passion that you have is enough to like, with you leveraging your network and like what you've learned and being open to continuing to learn, that's enough to like get started if you have enough will within you to do it.
Second question, and we talked a little bit about fear, but what would you say was your greatest fear when venturing out on your own, or I guess with a co-founder, and did that fear actually come true?
I think my biggest fear was just that like I would never be the person to be able to be kind of like that external face of the company in any way. Like I think I was scared to like be in pitch meetings. I was scared to like do podcasts or do, like any sort of events. Like I was scared to have to be the one to speak because I never thought that like my voice would be the one that people would want to hear. I'm like, I'm not the charismatic one. Like I'm not the one that like people want to hear from. And I now lead sales for the company. I'm like running sales meetings every day, and I do webinars like every week with like industry leaders that I'm like humbled to be on the same like virtual or physical stage with. And I think a lot of that has just been like me facing my own fears and still just being able to like do it even though I have the fear. Even today I'm like, oh, why does she like, what am I going to say that's interesting, but I think I'm always going to be a little bit on that spectrum.
Yeah, which is fine, right? It's fine to be like that, but I think it's also great to just step into the unknown like you did. So kudos for that. And final question, what was your greatest learning since founding your company?
It's always going to be moving really fast, and stopping to celebrate the small wins is really important because it's really easy to just be looking towards like really giant, goals that you have and be like, oh, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. And if you keep living that way, like you're never going to be satisfied or happy with how you're doing. And that's just going to be really difficult. So I think it's just like finding ways to celebrate those small wins, even just for yourself.
Celebrate every day.
Yeah. I mean, easier said than done, but that's what advice I would give myself again if I was starting my company again.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Anisha, thank you so much. It was so, so nice to connect again. And thank you for sharing your story, for giving such amazing advice. I feel really inspired and grateful for having had that conversation with you. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well.